Let's take a tour of my Bioactive Terrarium room. We'll start with my vampire crab paludarium that I keep on my desk. The centerpiece is definitely my waterfall, but also this little water section underneath, filled with sherry shrimp. They mainly eat the biofilm and other particles that settle on the surfaces in the water, but they also love these pellets, but they gotta act quick because they're not the biggest boy on the block. That would be the vampire crabs. These little guys can be a little bit selfish, but luckily they are very messy eaters, so even if they take the pellet into their own little corner, they inevitably spread it all over the tank anyway. But even these vampire crabs gotta keep their head on the swivel because they're only babies, and their parents, these guys, are known to cannibalize their babies if they get a hold of them. Here he's eating a little bit of fish food flake. The leftover fish food flake gets tackled by the terrarium cleanup crew, being these springtails. These little guys eat all of the decaying plant and animal matter and turn it into fertilizer for the plants. They're also a great snack for the vampire crab. Speaking of the vampire crabs, the adults will spend most of their time in their tunnels or burrows, usually coming out at night to scavenge for food. They actually have quite the extensive tunnel network underneath the moss as well. Sometimes you'll see them creeping out at you. An interesting development in my vampire crab terrarium is this strawberry that grew. What's interesting is I actually didn't even plant this thing in here, and it grew the most juiciest strawberries you can imagine, which is great because my red-footed tortoises love strawberries. Works out pretty nicely since the strawberry grow rate is in line with the amount of strawberries they can eat. Once in a while, I'll slice a piece of cucumber into my terrarium, not only because the sherry shrimp love to eat it, but also because these pesky bladder snails are attracted to it. Bladder snails aren't necessarily always a pest, but in this case they're competing with my sherry shrimp for the biofilm settled on the surfaces. So I scoop them out of there with the cucumber in hand and once again feed them to my tortoises, who love to eat snails. When my vampire crabs aren't hiding in their tunnels, they're usually take to the water to scavenge and also to molt their shells. Sometimes it takes a minute to actually spot them. Their eyes can be a dead giveaway for the adults, but the babies can be a different story. Let me know if you spot the baby in this clip, because there's one in here right now, and it's not the molted shell above him that he's walking across. I always like watching them pinch the water when they're in the waterfall section. I think it looks especially cool. Having a water feature as well as all these different mosses really helps with keeping the water clean, but inevitably there will be some algae breakouts and buildup on the glass. I handle that very easily with some sharp razor blades. Freshly scraped glass algae is a real delicacy around here, a fan favorite of the shrimp. It makes the cleaning process pretty easy. All I do is scrape it up and the sherry shrimp will clean from there. We'll keep the tour going with one of my favorites, my volcano-themed poison dart frog, Vivarium. It's home to this tiny species of thumbnail poison dart frogs known as the Ranitomea fantastica trunominal. About a year ago, they started laying eggs on the glass. Once the tadpole hatches, the male frog will actually carry the tadpoles around on his back. Sometimes you'll actually see both the male and female frog hanging out together in tandem for a few days until they find a suitable location to deposit the tadpoles. They usually deposit the tadpole in the center of a bromeliad plant or just a small puddle, kind of like the one I have in the bottom of my paludarium. This is where the tadpole will hang out until it eventually will grow some legs and hop out of the water. But it's not all fun and games as a poison dart frog tadpole, because bigger tadpoles will try to eat you, even though they're the same species of tadpole. Assuming you don't get cannibalized by one of your older brothers or cousins, you'll eventually grow legs and arms, and a few days later you'll hop out of the water. The frogs, when they do come out of the water, are absolutely tiny. Here's one of the freshly out of water poison dart frogs. He still even has the little black spots on his head, which will eventually go away. The frogs actually will still absorb their tail for nutrients before eventually learning how to hunt, and for that, you need tiny bugs. Just like in my vampire crab terrarium, the perfect bug to use are these tiny little springtails. These tiny little bugs are the perfect feeder to get your poison dart frog babies started learning how to hunt and eat. Once they've mastered hunting the smaller white tropical ones, you can even feed them the bigger orange springtails as well. Eventually, springtails won't be enough, and they'll upgrade to the staple of all poison dart frog diets, the flightless fruit fly. This guy was still a little bit too big for him, but he's learning. One thing that I gotta do about once a week is actually breed flightless fruit flies, and by that I mean make flightless fruit fly cultures. This is pretty simple. All I gotta do is boil some distilled water, mix the media, and add some Excelsior. Once this cools, I'll add some flies from an existing culture, give it a few days, and presto, thousands of flightless fruit flies to feed to my poison dart frogs. One really great trick that I learned to keep the flightless fruit flies in the terrarium is simply to put a piece of banana in there, and that'll keep them all centralized. It also has the added benefit of bringing the frogs to the front of the tank, which can be sometimes a little bit shy. This is also a great strategy to use if I'm going to be going on vacation and I don't want to trust someone else to feed my poison dart frogs for me. The fruit flies that aren't immediately eaten will actually breed and produce larvae. That larvae is great for keeping some poison dart frogs fed while I'm away. There's also quite an extensive cleanup crew in here in the form of snails, slugs, worms, pill bugs, and all sorts of tiny microbial life. They keep my terrarium looking nice and clean. They also produce great fertilizer for my plants, which keeps my plants looking nice and happy. Next to my Volcano Paludarium is my other poison dart frog, Vivarium. This one home to my blue poison dart frogs, my Tinctorius azurus. There's a trio of them that live in here who usually spend most of their time in their little cave in the back, not hanging out on top of the plants like this guy is this time around. If you're looking to get into the poison dart frog hobby, I would definitely recommend the Tinctorius poison dart frogs. These guys are by far the most active, and let's be real, one of the most fun things in the hobby is actually feeding them flightless fruit flies, and these guys will not hesitate to come to the front of the tank and give you quite the show. Apart from having the biggest personalities, they're also the largest species of poison dart frogs, so you've got a lot more to look at here. Although they're the largest dart frogs, they're actually one of the more affordable, usually coming in between $50 to $60 a piece, rather than the $80 to $120 that the thumbnail dart frogs next door would run. Poison dart frogs will absorb minerals and nutrients through their skin, so something that I do for them is actually mix up this mineral bath and put it in there for them. There's a really nice impression at the bottom of my poison dart frog waterfall that I like to put the clay in. It looks really natural, and it also makes the frogs a little bit more inclined to hop on in there, usually with the help of some flies to encourage them to hang out a little bit longer. Of course, I always whip up a second batch for my other poison dart frogs who benefit from a clay bath just as much. I love watching them hop around in there because their skin looks kind of metallic and the clay really contrasts it and makes it look extra shiny. Poison dart frogs are probably one of the more unique animals I have, but not all of my terrariums are built mainly to house animals. This one is more of just a flex on how to build a cool terrarium with a waterfall feature. It took me quite a while to get the water flow of everything right, especially for this here water bridge. One of the more cool aspects of it is that it's not actually secured by anything, it's just balanced right. This terrarium will actually not be staying in my terrarium room much longer. I'm just waiting for this moss to grow in a little more before I make a full guide video, and it'll be going to my girlfriend's tattoo shop. I did borrow some of my sherry shrimp from my vampire crab terrarium, as well as a couple of the assassin snails. I went ahead and added them into the water section of the paludarium. They, along with some springtails, will be the only real inhabitants. I wanted to make sure that the maintenance was relatively low, but it's still a little bit of life, and they're still really fun to look at, especially the sherry shrimp that have some pretty cool personalities that really come to life when there's no fish for them to worry about. Something that I really enjoy about paludariums and terrariums is watching the roots grow. It's one of those little added features you don't really think about, but it's just cool to watch them take over and grow out throughout the tank. I also have a few other closed bottle terrariums. The one in the middle hasn't been open for 2 years, and the one on the right side is the one that I grow most of my springtail colonies in. Once in a while, I'll throw in some high-protein cat food, and they go absolutely bananas in there for it. It's a pretty inexpensive way to have an endless source of food and a way to seed all of my new builds with the Bioactive cleanup crew. My Tinctorius azurus poison dart frogs usually get some of these as an appetizer because they're definitely too small to fill one up, but it doesn't mean they don't enjoy them as a snack. If you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed because I've got tons of new projects in the works, kind of like this cascading waterfall build that I'm working on. Also, check out my other builds. I've got guides for all of the terrariums you just saw. Thanks, have a good one.